Jeremy, what did
Crispin, good morning. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. You've got a great fuzzy sound. It's good. It's good. Jeremy,
well, we had a discussion with this wonderful audience and agreed that we're going to have a participatory show. This is the first one you've done live from the location. Next year, Crispin, Durham, Tolpuddle, Burston, the Chainmakers, and Jarrow. Okay.
Okay, yeah, and I'll come with the stage truck as well next time.
So yeah, bring the stage truck. Absolutely, we'll have a great time. Like Radio 1 can do a road show, Crispin Frentoff can do a road show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, they all agree.
Oh, you're praying to the audience. Praying to the audience, right? Jeremy, what did you make of what Dr. Bob was saying there about the NHS? I mean, you can't really have lots of private providers in the NHS and then say that we're defending the NHS, we're fighting for the NHS. That doesn't make sense, does it?
The Tories.
Oh, your audio's gone a bit. That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. Your question about the NHS. The Tories learned a lesson about the NHS with Margaret Thatcher. The Labour quite rightly accused her of trying to destroy the NHS. She claimed, and I remember the words very well, the NHS is safe in her hands. And what they've done is maintained the fiction that there is a universal health service because that's what they want everyone to believe. In reality, they're dicing up, slicing up and carving up the NHS into internal markets, into privatisation of particular services, into an almost wholly private care system in this country. And they are taking billions every year out of our NHS budget. They make enormous profits. Now, when the COVID pandemic hit, bed occupancy rate was at 94%, care homes were at 100%, and there was obviously a big problem. Had we been in office, had I had the authority to do something about it, what I would have done is taken over every part of the private health service that we need to in order to make sure that every NHS patient was treated by NHS employed staff in an NHS facility. To be effective, the NHS must be publicly owned and publicly run as well. So the idea there can be some sort of sharing of the public and private sector of the NHS means the private sector will always leach it out. Listen, I go back long enough to remember the campaigns against private beds in NHS hospitals in the 1970s, when we tried to get rid of them all then, because we saw it as a Trojan horse for the undermining of our NHS. And so I think there has to be a demand to get the private sector out of the NHS. There also has to be a positive demand for a universal care service for everyone that needs care. Not necessarily all old people, many others need care. A national care service that takes the strain and the stress away from relatives, families and loved ones trying to care for somebody who's going through a very difficult time. If we can afford an NHS, we can afford a national care service on exactly the same principles. Universal, free at the point of need.
With the cost of living as crisis, as they call it, or the emergency, the NHS is going to be under much more pressure than it's ever been as well. So surely this is a time for Labour to look at making a move to nationalising more of the NHS, as you're bringing it more into public ownership. And we can't rely on these private companies. Do you think that's all going to come to a head during the winter?
Yeah. I do think it's going to come to a head more and more, because if you're managing the health service, not owning it, if you're a manager in the NHS and you've got obviously enormous demands placed upon you. It makes no sense to be paying through the nose into the private sector to charge whatever they want in order to accommodate NHS patients. It makes much more economic sense, never mind the moral and political case for it, of those services being publicly run and publicly owned. Ask any local authority that's taken services back in-house, and they tell you two things. One is there's a better quality service. Two, it's much easier to manage because everybody's working for the same employer and they're on the same terms and conditions. And three, you don't have a bunch of shareholders or hedge funds looking over your shoulder about how you're running your housing service, your local care, or anything else. And the experience in my borough has been that we've taken a very large number of services back in-house. There's very little now run by anybody other than my council, Islington Council. And it's run better. And you know what? It's cheaper. And the wages are higher. Why? Because the profits have been taken out.
And I mean, the other thing that we've been talking about today was the rail system, and I was talking to Mick Whelan and the importance of bringing it back under public ownership. Do you think that? I mean, we've talked about the NHS being more under public ownership and the rail system as well, possibly. Is that something, do you think, that will emerge as the only way out of this cost of living emergency, that these provisions have to be brought under public ownership?
Well, the rail system is effectively publicly run now, in that the rail system simply could not work without the degree of public investment and subsidy in it. All of the capital infrastructure projects are publicly funded. The network rail system is obviously publicly owned and publicly funded. And during the pandemic, they ceased the franchise system and essentially now pay train companies to run trains and on lines. And so they have a guaranteed income for running a system, which the government gets the fair income from, but the government also takes the risk. So what we've done is got the worst of all possible worlds, and there's people making a large amount of money out of the rail system with no risk whatsoever to themselves. And therefore, I strongly support complete public ownership of the rail system. And Andy MacDonald worked very hard on this. We didn't have time to get all of the details of it together before the 2019 election. And so I asked Andy to continue that work afterwards. And he produced GB Rail, which is what we wanted to call it, which would have been entirely publicly owned, including the freight networks as well. It's interesting that our railway system is in fact publicly owned, but not by the British public. Every one of the train operating companies and the franchises they've got at the moment are run by state-owned operators from other countries. It is absurd. So we're actually handing a very large amount of money over to Dutch, German, Chinese, and many other taxpayers on behalf of our railway system. We're perfectly capable of running our own railway system.
But what I'm asking is, I mean, that might have been, that people think of that as a sort of dogmatic thing of the left, that we want things to be publicly owned. However, I'm just saying, with the situation of people not being able to survive with food or heating, such things as energy companies and rail companies and the NHS, we can't rely on the private sector to look after people, can we?
I'm not dogmatic. What I want is cooperation, democracy, and efficiency. And so publicly owned services that are under some degree of democratic popular control are what we want. So we take the water industry, for example, should be in public ownership. It's an obvious monopoly. There's only one pipe that goes into each person's house. It's an obvious monopoly of supply. What I want is the basic structures as we have now, Severn Trent, Thames, etc., as the areas for running water companies, but instead they'll be run by a combination of those that work in them, the local authorities, trade unions in the area, and businesses in the area. And they would also have much tighter responsibility for the environmental impact of it. Now, I just point this out. Last year, there were 400,000 sewage discharges into the river system in Britain. The worst offender was Thames Water. And this week, I thought it was a spoof when I first read it. The Environment Agency called for the jailing of the chief executives of the water companies that pollute our rivers. Jailing of them called for by a public body. That's a pretty strong message to give out. I agree with it. It is disgusting what they're doing. Thames Water is siphoning profits out of a system which is not functioning properly, badly maintained, and every year huge discharges into the Thames, as there are into other river systems around the country. We are ruining our environment, killing our fish, and poisoning our people, all for the profits of private water companies. Take them back, own them ourselves, and we will take responsibility for running it properly and ending pollution.
Can you tell them to quieten down a bit? No, can you tell them to quieten down? No, I'm only joking. That's so you've mentioned water. You've mentioned water, rail, healthcare, and we've talked about energy. All of these sectors, water, rail, healthcare, energy, they all clearly should practically be in public ownership. Do you think that this is kind of the end of Thatcherism and her obsession with private ownership? Do you think that what's happening with this emergency of people not being able to heat their homes or eat is going to spell the end of privatisation?
I would like to think so, and I would like to agree with you that this is the end of privatisation. I hope so, but I'm not so sure. We have to, on the left, have a better model of community and public ownership of industries and services. When Thatcher was privatising electricity, gas and water, I just remember it like it was yesterday. I was on the Holloway Road in my constituency giving out leaflets outside the London Electricity office and showroom, arguing against privatisation. And I'd stop people, give them the leaflet, ask them to sign a petition and so on. And it was quite sad. A number of people said, I didn't know it was publicly owned. It doesn't feel like it. It doesn't feel like it's my service. They didn't feel any involvement in it. And so it is a debate and a discussion we've got to have about the structure of it. If you look at the history of nationalisation under the post-war Labour government, yes, they nationalised coal, they nationalised steel, and so on, a lot of industries, quite rightly so. But there was a debate in the cabinet about forms of public ownership. Attlee came down very strongly, not on the side of workers' control of the newly nationalised industries, but of national boards that would be appointed by the government to administer those industries. And he then said, but we'll have trade union representatives on the boards, but they won't be representatives of the workers in that particular industry. And so you had a system whereby the patronage of the Prime Minister meant that many trade union general secretaries were put on the boards of nationalised industries that they had no particular membership interest in whatsoever. So my former General Secretary, Alan Fisher, of National Union of Public Employees, was a member of the board of Harland and Wolff Shipyard. Wow. Why? I don't know. He knew absolutely nothing about shipbuilding, wasn't remotely interested in shipbuilding. He was a General Secretary of a Public Service Union. Now, I'm sure he was a diligent director and all that sort of thing, but that is not what we want. We want democratic public ownership, where those skills that run our railways, those skills that are there in aircraft and all the other industries, are actually there running the service itself. Ken Livingstone managed to achieve quite a lot of that when he first became mayor over the running of Transport for London, and before that when he was leader of the GLC. We've got to work out democratic public ownership to defend public ownership. At the moment, public ownership is now much more popular, and everything in our manifesto of mail, rail, water, and the right of workers to take over businesses that are failing was actually very, very popular.
So you're sort of
broadband communism as well.
Say it again.
Broadband communism. It means that you'd get a really good here in Tolpuddle, everybody in Tolpuddle would get free internet, and you'd be able to hear this wonderful audience properly.
Yeah.
In your
No,
garret home somewhere in deepest Oxfordshire.
No, I think that's a good point. But I was just thinking, so you've just said that public ownership could be improved. I mean, that's what Thatcher manipulated, wasn't it? The fact that it was so cold and not at all consumer friendly, as you might call it. So maybe we could. It's like a dialectic, isn't it? I mean, Thatcher's said it's not the right kind, and then we can adapt it to one that is friendly to the workforce and the consumers, or whatever you want to call them,
and more local, because surely energy generation with a local grid is more efficient than huge power stations at a distance losing 30% of the electricity in transmission. The German model of local generation of wind, wave, water, ground pump, solar, and so on, with a local network, obviously keyed into a wider national network, is actually more efficient and a better use of the electricity that's generated. Exactly the same applies on so many other services. I mean, the NHS is obviously a national service, but you wouldn't have every last decision made by a national body. It has to be made at the local clinical level. I mean, that's kind of obvious. And so it applies to so many other services as well. Well, we need to empower people. What we need is community socialism. A lot of people are socialists, work very hard in their community for the social good of everybody else, and actually don't realize they are socialists, just like you are, just like I am, just like the wonderful people in this very hot, sweaty tent here in Tolpuddle.
Well, Jeremy, I want to talk to you in a bit about the Just Stop Oil campaign that I think the Peace and Justice campaign are part of, aren't they? But I'd like to, before I move on to that, I'd just like to play a video because we couldn't get her to be live. She's gone away.
You haven't asked me anything about Tolpuddle yet either.
Sorry?
You haven't asked me anything about Tolpuddle yet.
Well,
I thought you were going to. Or have you given up on that?
No, we're going back to that. But I just thought I'd play this. I spoke to Naomi Wimborne Adrissi. She's not able to. She's had to go off at the moment from Tolpuddle, but she made a little interview here for everyone to watch. So Naomi, good to see you, Naomi. Sorry I missed you at Tolpuddle yesterday. I don't know how that happened. I had this hat on and this funny jacket. I thought I was only wearing it so you could see me.
I was waving my JVL flag all over the place. I don't know how you missed me.
Oh, you must have had it over your face and then I couldn't see you. So look, when are the NEC ballots dropping? Is it this week?
From Friday on, people should start getting their ballot forms. Yeah, and they'll get a little booklet with all the statements of all the candidates. And it's sod's law, isn't it? My name begins with a W, Wimborne Adrissi, so I'll be the one at the very end. Make sure everybody reads down to the bottom.
Are you optimistic that you could get on the NEC? How do you feel?
I mean, when I started, I felt a bit like Jeremy probably felt when he was put forward for the leadership. No chance, But now, see, so many more groups and individuals are taking on board this idea of a left slate, grassroots 5. Maybe we can crack it, maybe we can get all 5 of us on. That would be amazing.
And what issue do you think, what would you bring to the NEC that isn't there at the moment, do you think?
Okay, well, I think it's what JVL is known for, really. It's being very bold and uncompromising, standing up for the principle that members should have free speech, freedom to debate issues, even sensitive issues like Palestine and the extent of anti-Semitism in the party. That's what we're known for. And if it's on that basis people have chosen to put me forward. So that's one of my main things. And then just generally to have full solidarity with this amazing wave of militancy, which I've seen developing here at Tolpuddle. It's been really inspiring the way people are talking about building from the grassroots, showing people that by collective action they can actually win struggles, and then more people will be encouraged and more people will join. It's really the only hope we've got in this sort of dire situation.
Yeah, and who did you see yesterday? Did you see Mick Lynch or Who did you?
And it's put respect on to me reaching over, because I brought with me the little shake tables. I can remember what I saw yesterday. But this thing that really had all those lessons in it was, yesterday morning. And it was billed as being Eddie Dempsey, who would have been great, of course, but Mick Lynch was there himself. Joanne Kay, Unison Southwest Regional Secretary, she was great. Real fighting talk from her. Dave Chappell, Southwest Trades Union Council rep. And their message was, not only do we all have to go and show solidarity on the picket lines, but the people mounting picket lines need to get away from this idea that a picket line is just a sort of demo or even a party where people share cake and sing songs, which is lovely and we must do it. But you are actually meant to talk to the people who are intending to cross the picket line and persuade them, politely, of course, not to do so. Lots of pickets are too nervous to do that after these years of the crushing of trade union militancy. That was a really inspiring message. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's good. It's good that that's come up. This new militancy. It's kind of helped us to see that there's another way out of this, because we're not getting much from the Labour leadership. But and also it's good that you're standing for the NEC, because it gives us some hope that there'll be someone fighting our corner. I know you're with us late, but I'm asking people myself to put you number one and the others 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Naomi. I know you want to put the others in equally. That's how you are. But I'm just going to talk over you and say everyone put Naomi number one. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Crispin. I look forward to meeting you in the flesh, with or without your jacket, at some point in the near future. And,
great.
And regards to everybody watching. I hope everybody's having a great time.
There you go, Jeremy. Naomi, if you're voting in the NEC elections, are you? Have you got a choice? Would you be voting for Naomi, or is that something you can't say?
Well, I've absolutely endorsed Naomi. I'm absolutely supporting. I think she's absolutely brilliant. Stands up for what she believes in, speaks out, and is utterly fearless in her campaigning work. Naomi's going to be absolutely superb.
And do you think people, if you had a voice like Naomi on the NEC, just one person could make a big difference if they speak out?
Yes, you have to be very on it, very patient, and also read an awful lot of detail into all the papers. And Naomi, I know, will do all of that. There's some great comrades on the NEC, and we're going to be supporting the slate.
Right. And now back to Tolpuddle, as you said, we haven't spoken about that yet. And when we spoke on Wednesday, you said you'd been going to Tolpuddle for many years. Can you tell us your history of going to Tolpuddle? When did you start going?
Well, my mother was very concerned for my political education, so she brought me to Tolpuddle. I thought it was a good thing to do, actually. And so I've been here many times, spoken here a number of times, not always speaking, but I've always come, because it is part of our history. It is a successful part of our history in a funny kind of way, because whilst the Martyrs got into something, they probably didn't realize how significant it was what they were doing. They were actually trying to defend their appalling living standards in the sense that they were losing wages. This was a time of enclosure of the common lands. It was industrialization, both of industry and of agriculture. Agricultural workers going to work in terrible factories in big cities, and those that remained losing the land which they used to grow their own vegetables and fruit on. And so this was a time of attack on the whole lives of rural Britain. And they're standing up against it, then being sent to the assize courts at Dorchester, eventually sent to Van Diemen's Land, to what is now Tasmania. Then there was this massive campaign with huge rallies and demonstrations in London and elsewhere. This was a time of the firmament of the growing of general trade unions, and it was a victory for the trade union movement that they were at least brought back to Britain. There is similar stories in other parts of the country where miners in Jarrow stood up against the coal owners. One was executed and his body was put into a wrought iron cage, and that wrought iron cage was put on the top of a truck, and it was towed by horses around every mining village so they could see the dismembered body of the former miners' leader, as a warning to the others. Others got off more lightly and they were deported to Australia. And that campaign, again, helped to try to bring them back. And so what I think Tolpuddle does is brings a lot of people together to celebrate our past and our history, but also that history empowers us for the future, which is why I said earlier on, and I wasn't joking when I said that this show should be done at other festivals around the country, such as the Chain Makers in the West Midlands and Black Country in the West Midlands, their festival. It should be done at Jarrow. The Jarrow Martyrs Festival is a very good one too. Also Peterloo. But then Peterloo wasn't the only place where soldiers killed those who were demanding the right to vote, the right to live. These were impoverished soldiers who had come back from the Napoleonic Wars. There was also the Cinderloo massacre in Shropshire, which is much the same as the Peterloo massacre. Now I'm speaking at Peterloo this year on August the 14th, and I'll be drawing the parallels of what happened obviously in Manchester, which led to the Mask of Anarchy poem by Shelley, but also the other historical events around the country. Our children are brought up with a awful approach to history, which is somehow or other, it's set dates, set periods, and set times. There's never a general narrative about the rise of popular movements, the rise of democratic movements, the rise of those demanding accountability, of trade unions, or that the slave trade, for example, was not abolished by the brilliance of William Wilberforce. I hold nothing against William Wilberforce. I'm sure he's a totally brilliant man, but he wasn't there in the Morant Bay Rising. He wasn't massacred in Western Jamaica. He wasn't one of those slaves that were killed because they stood up against the slave trade. Our children need to understand it was the slaves who abolished the slave trade. It was workers who created trade unions, and that trade union strength led to great achievements like, which we were talking earlier, the National Health Service. History empowers us. History excites us, and history can make our children be stronger, be more confident, and above all, be more united in the sense of what communities can achieve together. Roll on history teaching.
We started the show after the newspapers talking about the Pentonville 5 as well, which had a 50-year celebration recently. Do you remember that event? What happened there?
The Pentonville 5, very well indeed. It was the Heath Tory government's National Industrial Relations Court, which sequestered union funds if union members took what was called illegal strike action. And the Pentonville 5 were imprisoned. There was a massive campaign in their support, but it wasn't all very simple, because I, for example, at that time worked for the Amalgamated Union of Engineering Workers, and all of our funds were sequestered because our members took sympathetic action. And so the union was told by the National Industrial Relations Court what it should do, and it refused to do it. And so the funds were sequestered. I was an employee in the head office of the AUEW at that time, and we used to get paid by weekly check. So on a Monday morning, why Monday morning, I have no idea, unless it was an incentive to get you into work. You got a check on your desk for your previous week's work, a weekly check. And then at lunchtime, we'd negotiated 20 minutes extra or something to cash the check. We all went down to the Trustees Savings Bank on Peckham High Road to cash the checks. There's a whole big queue of us. We knew what the National Industrial Relations Court was up to. We knew the union funds were at risk. And everybody cashed their check until it got to me. I pushed the check under the glass thing in the counter for the bank clerk. The bank clerk then counted out my money like this and started pushing it towards me. As his hand was pushing the money towards me, the manager hand came down like that and pulled his hand back. So my money to within a couple of inches of me, and then it went back again. And so I said, what's going on? He said, we've just been told we can't pay any more money out to the AUEW. All your funds have been frozen. I was the first one. And so we then headed off for a demonstration outside the National Industrial Relations Court. And then Pentonville 5 was a much more serious and bigger affair. And the demonstrations outside Pentonville Prison in their support, the sympathetic industrial action that was taken all over the country by dock workers and many, many others. And then these people we'd never heard of before. I didn't know there was such a thing as the official solicitor. So the official solicitor, accompanied by the court tip staff, was then sent from the High Court, which had overruled the National Industrial Relations Court, to Pentonville Prison. He bangs on the door like this, and the door is open, and he said, I require the presence, and read out the 5 names, and they walked out free. Working class action all over the country achieved that. That ended the Industrial Relations Court, and it meant that the 1974 Labour government that came in, Michael Foot, Employment Secretary, first and most important job was to abolish the Industrial Relations Act, which he did. Well done, Michael Foot, in that. And I remember coming here to Tolpuddle that year, that summer, and Michael was speaking here then. The government had also introduced the Health, Safety and Welfare at Work Bill, and the Tories were very against it because they didn't want the rights of workplace representatives and health and safety, particularly the farming industry. Michael made an absolutely brilliant speech right over there that day against it. And again, we won on that. We got health and safety legislation. And by and large, we've kept that health and safety legislation because the carnage at the workplace of farm workers dying from machinery and poisons, pesticides and so forth, and so many others, particularly the mining and other industries. Safety is very much a trade union issue, and don't let people make these ridiculous jokes about health and safety at work and so on. It's crucial, it's vital, it saves lives.
This is really fascinating talk to you, but with the miners' strike, we've been talking about the miners' strike. Did you watch that TV show Sherwood that was on recently that talks about the effect of the miners' strike on villages?
People have talked to me a lot about that program. I haven't seen the program, obviously I will, but the effects on the villages are still there. The effects on those communities are still there. You lose that solid base of the miners' welfare, the centre of the village, the community, the whole idea of it, people working together, supporting each other, and that solidarity of the mining communities. And it goes on in lots of other ways. I went to the DHL place at East Midlands Airport. It's a massive facility that does all DHL parcels that are loaded on planes to go all over the world and so on. It's a huge facility. And I said to the manager, what's the issues like here about safety at work? Because there's belts, conveyors and all that sort of thing. And he said, no, we're totally on it. And our workforce is very responsible and they're totally on to me if anything goes wrong. He said, do you know why? I said, why is that? He said, because most of our workforce were ex-miners who knew all about safety, working together and that sense of community. And he was full of praise for them, for their serious concerns about the safety of their mates at work. And so that's an achievement for all of us. But the mining given so much, and those villages have now suffered so much with unemployment, underemployment, insecure work, high levels of drug abuse, and so much else. Well, there's a whole story there, and we have to campaign for rights at work from day one of employment. We have to end 0 hours contract. We have to end insecure work. And above all, we as a movement, we've got to do it ourselves, because legislation isn't going to come with this Tory majority in Parliament, of recruiting gig workers, delivery workers into union membership to give them that strength and that sense of solidarity. So let's use the arguments and support the rail workers, of course, of the others are taking action this summer, but also use it as an example to recruit a whole new generation into our union membership.
I mean, with the miners' strike, we were talking also about the way that the state undermined the miners, and what was said by the Ridley Report. I mean, that's pretty shocking stuff. That is, you're talking about history not being taught properly. Nobody seems to have been taught much about the Ridley Report.
No, they haven't been taught properly about it. Remember, for most of the 84-85 miners' strike, the NUM, National Union of Mine Workers, had no funds at all. Their funds were all sequestered by actions of the Tory government. And so the whole system of all of their members and their families and their communities being fed and being able to survive relied on an informal network of food deliveries and money being passed around, cash being passed around. I mean, I remember driving truckloads of food to Yorkshire and to Kent coalfields in South Wales during the miners' strike. I also remember collecting a very large amount of money for the miners through the Socialist Campaign Group and others, and being asked to hand it over to Peter Heathfield, who was General Secretary of the NUM. But he was worried that he would be caught carrying this very large amount of cash, many thousands of pounds. And so we agreed to meet at St Pancras Station, pretend we didn't know each other, and then walk together to the very large gentleman's toilet on the basement there, which I walked into carrying a carrier bag with all this money in. It was a sort of grotty old plastic carrier bag with many thousands of pounds in. And then, without saying a word, because we weren't sure who was following us, what was, we looked around, nobody obviously there. And we checked all the cubicles to make sure there's nobody there. I then took the money out of the carrier bag. Peter put it in a very slimline business briefcase, carefully and neatly folded a copy of the Daily Telegraph to put on top of the money in case anybody decided to search his case. He then went one way and I went the other. The miners got their money. Nobody got arrested. The children got fed the next day. That's how we did it.
Oh. I mean, there's also, I mean, the issue we talk about as well. I mean, we talk about what's happening in Sri Lanka. I mean, the situation of people diving into the president's swimming pool is fun, and we're all getting ready for our speedos to be. We're going to go out on a demo in speedos soon to frighten the establishment. John Dunn's leading it, apparently.
What are we going to?
But when you say that we're not getting enough political education about history, we're not getting much about the present either. So it's kind of like all angles are covered by those who don't want change. They're covering everything, aren't they?
It's about understanding how these things come about and how these issues come about, like in Sri Lanka, like in Myanmar, but also working out real solidarity. And this week, I think it's tomorrow, I'm meeting online, which I met them before, a large group of trade union people in Myanmar who are trying to protect jobs of garment workers and fight back against the military in solidarity with the Rohingya people in Rakhine State. And so there is a working class movement against them, against the military who've taken over in Myanmar. In exactly the same way, there is a very large working class movement in Sri Lanka, and there's a whole history of socialist activity all over Sri Lanka, of both Sinhala and Tamil speaking people, as well as within the Muslim community. And the interesting thing is, to me, the demonstrations I've been watching in Colombo seem to be including everybody in them. That surely has to be the right way forward. And so we have to express solidarity to people there. It must be very frightening when suddenly there is no means of cooking, of traveling, or there's not enough food in the shops to ensure you can eat, because parts of Sri Lanka are a very urbanized society. They need shops. They can't all grow their own food.
Yeah. And they're just sort of the first country to face this cost this cost of living situation.
And at the same time, the British governments and other Western governments are not doing anything other than proposing a new system of austerity. The Tory candidates that are left in the leadership issue, the Tory party, are basically arguing about who can give the biggest giveaways and tax breaks to the wealthiest people within our society and impose the greatest austerity on the rest. That's the appeal they're making to this very narrow base of quite right-wing conservatives in this country who are going to be voting, if there are two candidates left in it this week. I mean, at one level, I don't care who the leader of the Tory party is. At another level, I passionately care about the campaigns we have to mount in order to do something much better in a totally different direction to improve the lives of the poorest people in this country, and of a government that speaks up for people in the rest of the world as well.
I wanted to talk to you about the Just Stop Oil campaign, because obviously we've got this heat wave that's going to kill many people apparently, and I mean I don't know how terrible it's going to be, but it's supposed to be bad tomorrow and on Tuesday. But the Peace and Justice campaign are part of this Just Stop Oil campaign. Can you tell us more about what that's all about?
The campaign it's a radical environmental justice campaign. If we carry on using oil and fossil fuels at the rate we do, and the obsession we have with an oil-based economy, there's a very good book I urge everyone to read called Crude Britannia, which is about the way in which crude oil has had a massive effect on Britain's economic development to the detriment of so much else, particularly of environmentally sustainable forms of transport and the like. And so Just Stop Oil is a strong, catchy headline of saying, look, we've got to get over this, we've got to get away from this, we've got to use technology for solar, wave, wind, ground heat, and so much else to provide us with the energy that we need. And recognize that an oil-based economy is very polluting. The plastics we make are many not biodegradable, some are, many are not. The incinerators with which we burn this rubbish ends up deeply polluting the upper atmosphere and causing lots of invisible gases which to be created, which damage the health of all of us. And so it is a strong plea for a sustainable economy, not based on shipping loads of goods all around the world, but a more localized production which does less damage to the environment. We've got to change our thinking. And I tell you, I go back to Tolpuddle, because there's a message here in this. The poet John Clare, who was not particularly left-wing. He was a farm worker who suffered all kinds of depression, actually. He had serious mental health conditions, but was supported by a wealthy family to live in a what was called an asylum in those days. And he wrote the most amazing poetry about the damage to the natural land and natural life in Northamptonshire by modern farming methods. Okay, it was written a long time ago, but he was a farm worker, as there are farm workers around here still. They're the ones who want to protect the natural world and the environment. They're not the ones who want to put organophosphates over everything or destroy all our wildlife. And I'll finish on this because I think it fits in with the whole stuff about the campaign on Just Stop Oil. I've been going around the primary schools in my constituency, asking the year 5 and 6 students what they think about biodiversity and what they mean by it. 10 years ago, I asked the same questions of them and then got a clue what I was talking about. Didn't even know what biodiversity was. Now they're completely on it and understand that we have to live with nature. We have to live with the natural world. And because if we carry on destroying it at the rate we are, we end up destroying ourselves.
Are you going to be speaking at a meeting at Tolpuddle today, or?
I don't think so. I'm here to support everybody else.
You're
I'm here in solidarity.
Well, look, it's been great.
I'm very happy to be here. I love Tolpuddle and that sense of solidarity that comes here. And since I was born in Wiltshire and grew up in Shropshire, I feel a strong affinity to the real radical history of rural Britain. My mum and dad, before they died, wrote a history of their village in Wiltshire, not so far from here. And they wrote the history around the Captain Swing riots against the machine smashers who tried to protect their jobs and living standards by smashing the new agricultural machinery that was being brought in. They weren't anti-technology, but they were very much pro being able to live and survive within their communities. There's a whole radical history to rural Britain that was simply obliterated and ignored by chocolate box covers pictures of thatched cottages without talking about the desperate poverty that so many rural people were forced into by industrial agriculture and industrialization. And the labour movement has got to be as strong in support of the environment and rural communities just as much as it has in our urban centres.
Yeah, especially in bus services and rail services, there's no way to get around if you're in a rural community at all.
Yeah. Villages are becoming the redoubt of those with a big enough pension to retire into, or those that can commute from them. Working class communities cannot live in villages unless they can afford to buy a place or have a car, and they're being priced out. And the holiday homes are a complete menace in doing this as well. So, you know, there's a whole agenda that the left have to encompass on sustainability and rural living, just as much as we do on all the injustice issues that we do in urban areas.
It's really interesting talking to you about the need to reshape public ownership and what it represents. I hadn't thought of that before, and also what you've just said about rural politics. Labour seems to just be involved in cities too much, doesn't it? I mean, I'm not in Labour anymore, but the left tends to forget that, like you've just said. Can I ask you something silly? Can I ask you something a bit light-hearted?
What, light-hearted? Yeah, okay.
Yeah. What's your favourite part of the British countryside? What's your, if you had to go somewhere that you'd really like to go in Britain, where would it be?
Favourite part of the British countryside? That's a tough one. That really is. I like cycling around East Anglia, mainly because there's no big hills. That's a good one for cyclists. But I think the Wiltshire Downs around Devizes are particularly magical to me, where you've got the ancient routes that were taken before the Romans came. Not so far from here, Maiden Castle outside Dorchester is a stunningly beautiful place. But then there's so many other places in the country I absolutely love the landscape of Northumbria. And also, since I grew up there, I love the natural history of Shropshire and the old glacial Lake Lapworth, which is now just a very small bit left called Aquilette Mere, or where the meres are around Ellesmere, not Ellesmere Port, Ellesmere. And so I love the natural history of this country as well. And you can actually get kids quite excited about it. So you take them out into the school yard, dig a hole in the ground, pull out some stones, and then say, where do these stones come from? And they say, dunno. Said, okay, what did the glaciers bring? And they say, oh yeah. So suddenly they begin to understand something about the topographical history of our country. So I love rural areas and the wildlife that goes with it. And so let's make the world sustainable for the next generation as well.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for coming on, Jeremy. Great to see you. I hope you have a good day and you don't get too hot. Have you got sun cream on?
I'm fine. I've got an excellent shirt. The shirt comes from Chiapas in Mexico. Laura gave it to me, and she's very keen that I wear it. So if you're watching this later, she'll see it.